A couple months ago, I did a video called Day in the Life of a Diesel Mechanic, and I've had a few requests to make another one. So I was doing some engine work on this C13 here, including the turbocharger and some overhead work, and figured I'd make another video about it. So this job here, we're going to be mounting the low pressure turbocharger and some other items on this side of the engine. And this is a job I'm actually finishing up for another mechanic that unfortunately sometimes you have to follow up on jobs if someone gets sick or goes on vacation, things like that. You may have to follow up, which is unfortunate, but sometimes you gotta do it. So mounting the low pressure turbocharger here, and somehow they find neutron stars to make these turbochargers out of because they are pretty heavy. And basically it sits on this cradle here, and then it has these mount bolts that run through the bracket and go up into the turbocharger to hold it in place. And that is what holds the low pressure turbocharger in place. Now these are the mount bolts with their really long spacers, and you can see I've got some copper anti-seize on there. I use that on pretty much all exhaust fasteners. Just a good habit to get into. Now you can see the lower turbo there is actually the high pressure turbo, and they're actually different turbochargers. One has a wastegate, one does not. And you got to get these lined up because the tubes run between both of them, and they supply each other with air and exhaust. So after you get it mounted, I'm going to have to install the oil lines, all the baffle, exhaust, intake lines, and the pre-cooler. So just trying to get it lined up here. So I've got it lined up. Whenever you're doing turbocharger work too, it's a good idea to check your turbine and make sure that it spins freely. And most turbos have this clamp that if you loosen it, you can spin the inlet or exhaust turbine or housing. And then you can check your turbine. You always want to check it if you've rotated or moved your housings. So did some work here, obviously. We've got our low pressure turbo mounted. We've got the bolts in. There's 4. Got your oil lines, oil and supply line. Got the brace for them. You've got your exhaust tubing between the turbos, the baffles, the inlet tubing. I've installed the pre-cooler, new pre-cooler lines and clamps. I have our alternator. I have insulated the wiring going to it, and the exhaust tube from the low pressure turbo. So after this, had to get the valve cover base cleaned up, find some bolts for it, find the injector harnesses. One of them had not been ordered, so I had to order that. Now, some people may not know this, but on the injector harnesses, there's actually numbers on each one. Because on some of the engines you could actually mix them up, but if you look at them closely, you can't because they are numbered. And on C13 you have your intake valve actuator oil pressure sensor that is in the valve cover base. So we've flipped over your valve cover base here, and we're going to be installing some new seal for it. And this is on most CAT valve cover bases, it's a cut to length seal that CAT likes to use. And a lot of your time as a mechanic is resealing things, whether they be valve cover bases, water pumps, structures, rear structures, front structures, cylinder head. Pretty much everything on an engine has a gasket and can leak something. So we're going to kind of speed it up here. And I am not the fastest mechanic in our shop, but I am one of the more thorough ones. I'm very particular when it comes to installing seals, gaskets, things like that. I always try to take a little bit of extra time, make sure they're cleaned properly and that the new seals are installed properly. Because last thing you want to do is have to pull this back off. So what we're doing here is you're just cleaning out the old silicone and gasket material from the valve cover base, making sure there's no residue or anything in there because you want it to be clean. Now, we have our new valve cover seal here, and there's two different styles on the C13. There's this cut the length style, and there's a one-piece one. The cut the length one is more typical to find. So on the cut the length one, you're going to start at one end, and there's an overlapping section. And what the overlapping section is, as you could see there, I applied a little bit of gray oil-resistant silicone. You're then going to feed the new seal in place, like so. Make sure you don't twist it or it doesn't get bunched up. And then you're going to take it to where it overlaps, and you're going to cut it to the right length. Right there, so that it overlaps about a little over an inch. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take silicone and apply it to the overlapping other end. And then you're going to insert it into the overlapping portion. Now, the very first engine I didn't use the overlapping portion and the cut to length. I saw that it said, hey, it had a one-piece seal. And I put the one-piece seal in there, and then it leaked and I pulled it off. So do not try to use the one-piece seal if it has the cut to length. You can only use the cut to length. Now, after you have installed your cut to length seal, where the two meet, you want to apply a little bit of silicone. Now, speaking of sealants, this is the sealant we've been using on the cut to length seal. There's a lot of different chemicals you use. There's the anti-seize I was using earlier. Now, on pretty much every job, here's molybdenum lube. That's for cylinder head bolts. We also are going to have thread lock. There's blue thread lock. There's red. We have sealant for pipe fittings. We also have Teflon tape. There's a ton of different chemicals you're going to use in the mechanic field. So after that, I installed the base. I ordered the right sensor, the IVA oil pressure sensor, installed the injector hole down nuts, and the Jake housings. So you can see I've installed the valve cover base and the Jake housings. Now I'm going to be torquing the Jake housings. And another percentage of your time as a mechanic is obviously installing things and torquing them properly. Now, when it comes to torquing, I tend to torque things more than once. I'll usually go through, especially on overheads, anything in the overhead, I like to go back and forth and make sure everything's torqued properly. Now, if you're using a high quality torque wrench, this should not cause the fasteners to become over torqued. And I would much rather have a fitting or fastener torqued to, let's say, 76 foot-pounds opposed to 75 at the spec, than to miss one or have them unevenly torqued. So I always go through, and obviously this is speeded up or sped up, but I always go through, go back and forth, torque everything properly, make sure everything's seated, you haven't missed any bolts or anything, and then I always go through and torque stripe everything. And these bolts torque to 75 foot-pounds, by the way. So this is kind of a snippet of what a standard day is in the shop working on engines. There's always the little things, you know, installing hose clamps, looking up parts and other information too throughout the day, but this is the majority of the day. So that was a pretty standard day there in the shop. Doing a lot of engine work. We mostly do engine work. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, maybe check out my other videos. I have some talking about what it's like being a diesel mechanic. I have the other day in the life video. I also have a lot of technical videos if you own a Cat engine or just wondering how to work on them. Okay, hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like and subscribe. Thank you.